You're dialed in to the MHSBCA Podcast with your host, Adam Woolley. Hello and welcome to the premiere episode of the MHSBCA Podcast. I'm your host, Adam Woolley, head coach at Lanphier High School in Madison Heights and member of the Coaches Association's Executive Board. This podcast is created to help Michigan baseball coaches connect with each other and develop professionally by looking into a number of topics we hope to explore in the coming episodes. Let's get right to it. And I couldn't ask for a better way to kick off our podcast than to bring in our first guest. Corey Farner is the head coach of Woodhaven High School. Corey's coming off a historic run in this season's tournament, but even bigger than that, Corey's here to talk about his career in coaching and some changes he made to his style and to his staff that saw immediate impact. Corey, welcome to the MHSBCA Podcast.
Thank you, Adam. I appreciate it, and I'm honored to be the first guest.
It's going to be great having you. I can't wait to get into the topic here and talk about it just a little bit. And as we get set, let's get a little background on you, Corey, as it relates to baseball and life. First, tell us a little bit about yourself, and then take us through your career in baseball and ultimately what led you into coaching.
Yeah, I'm a teacher in Woodhaven, Brownstown. I teach 8th and 9th grade special education. I'm married, 2 kids, both 9 and 6. And they're a great support system for me and my coaching. I grew up in Taylor, Michigan, where we played, just about every sport possible. If it had a ball, we were playing. And baseball was my favorite sport. We had a very competitive little league. And as we kind of got older, we started playing travel baseball. And back then, that travel baseball scene was a lot different than it is now.
For sure.
So it was very competitive. I learned a lot. I played high school baseball at Kennedy High School, which had its own historic, run in 1988 with Steve Avery.
Mm-hmm.
And that kind of got me really interested in attending that school and trying to beat his records was the goal when I was 12 years old,
Yep.
But I had great coaches there, Tony Brinson and Herb Eccleton, and a host of others. I had great, travel ball coaches growing up when I was in my teens, and it just was a great experience. I learned so much from them. But probably the biggest impact on my playing days was my dad. And I didn't understand that until I was a little older and coaching myself, that I realized the impact that he had. My dad was a football coach by trade. He had coached for over 40 years, and he coached baseball just because we were his kids, and, that's what he wanted to do.
Sure.
And the lessons that I learned from him early on really kind of were the precipice of change with my coaching style within the last couple of years.
Wow.
So,
okay.
Once I got through the high school ages, my dad was kind of taking a back seat. He was just a great parent who watched us play and never said a word, never critiqued anything that we did on the field. He was just, there to support us and root us on. And I didn't realize at the time how great that was. But now that I'm an adult and I have my own kids, I see how rare that is in this day and age. But did a great job. Out of high school, I played at Madonna University under Greg Hager, which was a great coach for me.
Absolutely.
And I learned a lot at that level. But injuries and kind of mounted up from high school, a couple of torn ACLs, tore my UCL in college pitching. So it just kind of mounted up to the point where it was, physically I couldn't do it anymore. And I started coaching pretty much within the next year and a half of getting hurt playing college ball.
Okay.
And it was a blessing because in that year and a half, it was like I was like depressed. Something was missing, and it took me a while to kind of figure it out that it was baseball.
Yeah.
And it wasn't just playing baseball; it was just really being around the game. And I found out through a friend of mine that they were looking for a pitching coach at my old high school, and I met with the coach. It was Tony Brinson. He was the head coach at the time. And I met with him and told him, kind of what I was interested in doing. And he told me what he needed. And he brought me on staff right away as a young kid. And we were very, very successful right off the bat. Tony was a great head coach. He had a lot of talent and did a great job. And I walked into a team to be a pitching coach at, 23, 22 years old.
Mm-hmm.
And they were state ranked the very first year. We were ranked in the top 10. And I'm like, wow, this is great. This is what high school baseball should be,
Yeah.
And it was a great run with him. And, then I was a JV head coach at Kennedy for a couple different years, and they changed head coaches. And I applied for the job, and I didn't get it the first time. I was still young. I was about 24 years old, and I didn't get the job. And that was a learning experience for me. So I was able to work under another head coach for a couple years and learn from him. And then when the job came back open, I reapplied for it, and I got it. And that was my first head coaching job at the varsity level. And it was with Taylor Kennedy, which was the school that I had graduated from.
Yep.
So that was kind of special. But the program itself was in disarray at the time, and there wasn't a lot of kids coming in to play baseball at Kennedy. There was kind of a dry spell. So my coaching staff at the time consisted of me and a former player of mine, Joe Gordon, who's still with me today. And, we had to try to build the program. And it was very hard to do that in the beginning, because, you're kind of using your experiences as a player and the brief experiences that I had as a coach to try to build something, out of a program that was kind of, like I said, we only had like 12 kids try out for varsity that first year.
Wow.
And this is a Division I school.
Yeah.
With a great history too. So we had to kind of figure out what was the best way to attack it. And what we decided to do was, 3 different phases. The first phase was really just to get out into the school and get kids interested in it. The second phase was to talk with the youth groups. We have a great Little League system in Taylor. There's 4 different Little Leagues there. And
wow.
so just to talk with youth coaches. We did a couple camps. We did a couple coaches clinics with those Little League coaches, and just started to network a little bit. And we started seeing, ball players kind of come through, and they started coming to Kennedy in 9th grade. And, we started kind of restocking talent, it seemed like,
Yeah.
We had more kids trying out. I mean, we added a freshman team, which we didn't have before that. So it worked out where there was more interest. And the third phase was to be consistent and run a tight ship and run a program that, we're going to teach the kids not only the fundamentals, but how to be, better people.
Yeah, definitely.
And those 3 things worked.
Yep.
I mean, it took a couple years, but we got to the point where we're, winning over 20 games a year. We won a couple district titles at Kennedy. And, then there was the rumors that the district was going to consolidate and go down to 1 high school. And when I was in Taylor, there was 3 high schools there. And now, after this year, there's only going to be 1. They just closed Kennedy here this month.
Okay.
So there were rumors about that about 4 years ago, and since I work in Woodhaven as a teacher, that job came open, and I live in the district. I did at the time, so it was just an easy move to go from Kennedy to Woodhaven, and maybe have the chance down the line to maybe coach my kids. But once we got to Woodhaven, it was a completely different situation. We thought maybe coming in and doing the same type of rebuild that we did at Kennedy would work. And what we found was that there was a lot of talent here already. And so we just had to change culture a little bit. We didn't have to do all the things that we did at Kennedy. We had to change culture, kind of implement a culture of winning and not just winning games, but how to conduct yourself.
Yeah. Yep.
And it took a while, to get the kids to buy in. But in the 4 years that we've been there, we've won 124 games.
Wow.
In 4 years.
Wow.
But this year was different. Obviously this was a historic run, but the first 3 classes that we had there kind of laid the foundation. And that's kind of the way that we told those kids, you're going to leave a legacy,
Yeah.
And you want to be successful here, but you also want your legacy to last. And we were very successful those first 3 years. We won league championships. But when we got to the postseason, it didn't work out. We didn't even win a district in those first 3 years. And that was not uncommon for Woodhaven. Woodhaven has never won a baseball district up until this year.
Okay.
46 years.
That's amazing.
It's a long run,
Yep.
So, yeah, and then this year obviously was a completely different animal. But I learned from every single coach that I played for, and I learned from every coach that I coached against. Especially in the early years when we didn't have a lot of talent and these coaches were completely out-coaching me left and right. And I picked up a lot of things that they did and tried to implement them into our program. And I think that's the priority, I think, of a young coach, is to do that. And we did it. And, it's turned out pretty good.
Absolutely. And you can, like you're talking about, and we'll get into this even a little bit further down the line, but continuing to grow, continuing to develop, and picking up those little bits and pieces from places. And like you said, you can do it when you're winning, and you can do it when you're losing as well. But let's jump back just a little bit, talk about this special season for Woodhaven, because it was an amazing run for you guys. You're playing in the toughest division, Division I. Take us through that playoff experience for you and for your players and what it was like for you guys. It had to be an amazing run.
Oh, it was awesome. And the one thing I kept getting advice from guys that have been there before, and like I had said before, I try to learn from everybody. So I'm like a sponge when it comes to that stuff. And he said, they all basically said the same thing, like, don't forget to enjoy the moment.
Yeah.
And that's what I kept trying to impress on our players is, once we won the district, the monkey kind of felt like it was off our back, like it was like, all right, well, we got that out of the way. And now everything we do here from this point on is like extra credit, man. It's just gravy on top. It's the cherry on top of a dessert. So I kind of came from that angle and said, we have zero pressure on us. There's going to be a lot of historic programs that are going to make deep runs this year. And they did. And I said, we're kind of the new kids on the block, and they don't know a lot about us, but we're going to be prepared for them,
Yeah.
And so we kind of took it along those lines, and just said, let's go out there and play our game and do the best we can and see where it takes us, because we had the talent to do it. The big difference with this historic run was, these kids finally started to believe in themselves, and that's where, I think, when we talk about it a little bit later about the tweets that I put out there, that's where it kind of came into play, where we took the next level jump. And, they just enjoyed the time that we were there. They enjoyed every single game. They were supportive of each other. And it was the most fun that I've had as a coach, watching these kids grow and evolve right before my eyes in, big time pressure situations. And I don't think, for the most part early on in the postseason run that we felt the pressure. We were playing for each other, and it wasn't really until I think we got to McLean Stadium in the semifinals and the final where, we started feeling maybe that little outside pressure.
Absolutely. And it catches up with you there. But I think that's incredible that somebody had, the wherewithal and the wisdom to pass that along to you, because if there's one, regret that I have about looking back in the quarterfinal experience that I had at our school, it wasn't, the idea of soaking up the moment, and I think that's great that you had that opportunity to be able to do that, because it's key. It's huge.
Well, I owe that to John Kostreva. He was there last year. He made it all the way to the finals. And I sent him a text as soon as we won the districts. And then we were going into the regional. I sent him a text, and he gave me some advice. And then once we won the regionals, he said, listen, man, you guys can take it all the way. He was like, but this is what you got to do. He goes, you got to enjoy the moment for what it is, because it's going to go by so fast. He goes, you're going to regret not, taking a step back. So, I took that a step further and said, to our kids, like, make sure that when you're there, we're focused on the moment, but like, enjoy it for what it is, because this is a great experience. And
coming from John, that's no shock whatsoever that he gave you that piece of advice. That's incredible. So a couple of days ago, you alluded to 3 tweets that, these, Corey, I'm telling you right now, they jumped off the page to me. I was looking at it and I was like, oh man, these are the kinds of things that I want to get back out on the field and start putting back into play. We've already talked about culture a little bit, but the first tweet that you put out dealt with changes that you and your staff had made about how you go about teaching. And I'm going to read the tweet to everybody here, just so that they understand what the perspective is. And then just ask you to expand on exactly what you were talking about, and maybe be a little bit specific about some of these changes that you were talking to. The tweet reads like this: as a coaching staff this year, we made some changes on how we teach things. I believe it's always looking to improve. Just because we had success last year doesn't mean we will have success this year doing all the same things. Teams change at the high school level every year. So again, just elaborate a little bit on that and talk to me a little bit about some of the specific things that you had mentioned.
Well, it gets to the point where, as a staff, I have an amazing coaching staff that, I feel very comfortable, taking their opinions, and they feel very comfortable giving those opinions to me. So I'm in constant communication all throughout the year about what we do, and whether or not it's effective, and I think that's the main thing. And, we've been very successful in the regular season the last 4 years, but when we got to the playoffs, something just didn't click for us.
Mm-hmm.
And leading into this year, we do a lot of the coaching clinics. We do the Michigan Coaching Clinic up in Mount Pleasant, and that is, obviously really good. We have a lot of great speakers that come in. you can pick the brains of guys. But really, the big thing for me was just networking with other coaches, and coaches in Michigan about what they've done. And I feel you can learn just as much from the guy that may have 1,000 wins from the guy that has 100 wins, just because they might be doing different stuff. But also, we went to the ABCA this year in Indianapolis.
Yeah.
And, we were able to listen to some great speakers. Augie Garrido was one of them. We got to talk to some guys. We got to network a little bit. And just from that experience, I'm not afraid to change,
Yeah.
I think at the high school level in the society that we live in right now, we needed to do some things differently, and I came from a very fundamental standpoint in terms of coaching philosophy, that you have to do things a certain way, and you got to, rep, and you got to do this, you got to do that. And sometimes practices would run, 2.5 hours, 3 hours.
Right.
And when I was a player, I didn't care how long practice was. I just loved being on the baseball field. But nowadays, that's not necessarily the case with all of our kids. I have a lot of, players on my team that play multiple sports. They have a lot of different responsibilities and obligations. So one of the things that we decided to do was we wanted to make sure that we streamlined the way that we're teaching fundamentals. So we do a lot of individual work. Just, I'll take defensive practice for an example.
Okay.
On Twitter, there's all sorts of great resources. The ABCA chats, when they talk about different things, I'm really interested in the defensive portions on those chats.
Mm-hmm.
And there were a couple guys that had great drills and reasons why they did things. And so we kind of went from like an individual skill to a small group skill workout and to a full team workout. And we followed that template defensively. And so what we saw was that, the kids were getting their indie work and they were really focusing on improving themselves. And then small group, they were focused on improving the group. And then when we did full team, you kind of saw how it all connected together.
Yeah.
But the other main thing that we did was we explained to the kids that, listen, nowadays you have a lot of constraints on your time. And, I don't want to be here for 3 hours with you guys and you guys be bored, So we're going to make practices fun. We're going to make them competitive. We're going to measure stuff while we're doing it. And I promise, I told the guys, I promise them I'm going to try to get you out an hour and a half, hour and 45 minutes tops.
Wow.
The kids really like that.
Mm-hmm.
That gives them more time to do other stuff.
Yeah.
And I think that's important. So we really held true to that. Even when we were indoors, we wanted to we were high intensity, good tempo, got through our stuff. Taught the stuff, we the skills that we wanted. We drilled them, and we kind of followed the template of small group to full team. And we got out and we got our workout. And I told them, I said, yeah, we didn't cover everything today,
Yeah.
but we wanted to make sure that we respect your time, just like you want to respect our time, and we'll get to it. Don't worry about it, And we always had our practice plan, for the week. Basically, we had an idea what we wanted to do leading up to the season. So I think that helped a lot, that we were, taking the time to explain things in detail individually, but also that, we weren't necessarily, killing these kids with 3 different, 3-hour practices and all this other stuff. So they really put forth the effort and the intensity for that hour and a half. And what I found was that hour and a half was double, the effectiveness of a 3-hour practice where you may have been able to cover everything you wanted.
Absolutely. Yep.
But within that hour and a half, like I said, the competitiveness, we played cage games hitting-wise. We would do little competitions where we'd split the teams up into 2. And we did a little bit of stuff with launch angle this year. We didn't get into it all the way because, I still am kind of traditional in the way we want to approach hitting. But we worked with the launch angle and exit velocity, and it was a great way to measure what the kids were doing. And we took them out to the bullpen out in Novi, and they have the hit tracks out there. And we had a bunch of fun out there, competing and breaking up into teams and playing games on the hit tracks. And I think it goes a long way because I think everything that we did this year was competitive, where they were competing against each other,
mm-hmm.
or it was measured, where
Right.
they're going against the stopwatch,
Yep.
or they're going against a radar gun. And it really made our practices that much more effective. And so that hour and a half was a blessing for all of us in terms of the time, but also we got so much good quality work in within that 90-minute schedule.
Well, and that kind of data and that kind of feedback is real. Like you said, it's measurable. It's things that they can put their heads around and wrap it around, and it gives them a goal to be able to go after. And I don't think it's any coincidence that your run coincided by blending that talent and that data together. You know, I think when the kids are able to see the outcome like that and see what their measurables are, they have something to shoot for. They have something to go up against, and it's a huge, huge advantage.
And one of the best things about it is that, you know, in the tweet, we talk about how teams are different every year because you're dealing with graduation. You know, you got a senior class. It may be a large senior class. Like this year, we had 7 seniors. Or it might be a smaller class. Like last year, we had 3 or 4 seniors that graduated. And in that situation, your team's going to change, and the identity of your team will change a little bit in terms of how you play the game. And I think as a coach, you know, at the high school level, you can't just be a system kind of guy. Like, this is what we do, and you have to acclimate to it. It needs to be kind of a fluid process where, hey, this is the personnel that we have to work with here, you know.
Yep.
And this is how we're going to have to play the game this year. You know, we might, you know, one year in 2015, I don't think we bunted, but maybe 3 times the whole year.
Sure.
You know,
yeah.
And then in 2016, I think we probably had 15 or 20 sacrifice bunts and probably 5 or 6 squeezes. You know, so every year your team makeup is going to look slightly different. I think the one thing that they can acclimate to is the culture of winning, and everything counts.
Absolutely.
Not just on the field, but off the field. You know, and I think that's one of the main differences that we did this year was not only with the practice schedule and some of the competitive stuff, was basically everything matters to us. You know, the way that you treat people in the hallways, the way that you talk to coaches, the way that you talk to your friends, the way that you support your teammates, but also holding them accountable. All of those things matter in life. And it's more important once you're done playing baseball than it is while you're playing baseball.
That is unbelievably stated, and I couldn't say it any better. And I think that there's experts out there that would have you come in and talk to groups that way, because that's the evolutionary process of coaching. That's the thing that changes the dynamics of teams. And I'm gonna jump off of that right now, because the other tweet that really stuck out to me came from a coaching perspective and came from an evolutionary process. And, you know, I think younger coaches go into this profession with a fire and brimstone mentality, and they have a hard time. I know I did, having a hard time differentiating our competitive side as a player and having that translate over into coaching. But your second tweet read like this: 2 changes I made as a coach. First was to be better at building relationships while staying consistent with our message. And then the second was to put more emphasis on what I wanted to see as a team, holding each other accountable, being a leader, and playing for each other. And I alluded to that earlier in my comment about being able to decipher between your competitive side and then the evolutionary process as a coach. So talk to me a little bit about how you go about walking that line as a leader. I mean, how do you institute that? What did you do?
Well, it goes back to my very first year coaching. And I played multiple sports in high school, but at the time, I had a high school basketball coach who was awesome. His name was Mike Baum, and he was also the varsity softball coach. And he was involved in the hiring process when I got hired. And, you know, we sat and met, and he gave me the best piece of advice that a young coach can have. And he knew me personally because he had coached me as a teenager in high school, not only, you know, coaching me in basketball, but seeing me play football and seeing me play baseball. And he said, you know, Court, he's like, all you have to do is this. He goes, you need to coach like you played. And I took that very literally at the time as being a 24, 25-year-old. So I'm like, all right. So like you said, I came in, fire, brimstone, this is what we're doing. You know, we're going to wear baseball pants, and we have practice shirts, and they're going to be tucked in, and we're going to shave, and we're not going to, you know, it was very New York Yankees stuff, you know. And I think that works to a certain extent, but there's a plateau that you inevitably will get to with that type of attitude.
100%.
And I do think you will see improvement on that, but at the same time, I think there's a ceiling to it, and we've reached that very quickly. Well, in the last couple of years, you know, I do a lot of reflecting in the summer. I call it my hibernation, time, and I do a lot of reflecting in the season. And one of the things, you know, that I reflect on is whether or not what I do is still effective, and it's still working, and what can I do to be better at it. And, you know, obviously there's a lot of, you know, information and a lot of stuff out there in social media about building relationships and stuff, but really, you know, I thought we tried to do a good job of that going up to it, but it wasn't the priority. It was like building relationships secondary to playing the game. And this year, you know, as a coaching staff, we had discussed it, and And for me personally, I needed to make a change in the way that I attacked that. I wanted to make an honest effort to build a relationship with the kid, and then have them play baseball.
Yep.
You know, and so it's very important that the relationship is built on trust, but it needs to be built on honesty. So one of the first things that we did before the season even started, it was really after tryouts. I got the entire team in there, and I said, listen, you know, we have the talent in this room right now to win a state championship. And I know you guys don't believe that yet because, you know, our school's never won a district. But I'm telling you right now, I've been around long enough that I do believe the talent is here. But, and there was always this, you know, this but, and it was, we're never going to get to that point unless we all sit here and make some changes. And it's going to start with me.
Yep.
You know, and I think that's the key. You know, they need to see that, you know, as a coach, we don't think that we're perfect. You know, yes, it's maybe our system of the way we do things or the, you know, quality of baseball, but it's, as a person, hey, and I told them right off the bat, there's going to be the time this year where I get a kid thrown out at home plate. You know, there's going to be a time where I get a kid, you know, I'm waving him from first to third, and he gets thrown out by 15 feet.
Right.
You know, and I said, but here's the difference, you know, and this is where I want you guys to take a lesson from it, is that I'm going to admit that was my mistake, and I'm going to learn from that mistake, and I'm going to get better.
You know,
and, you know, as a head coach, I don't have people yelling at me, you know, when I make a mistake.
Right.
You know what? You are going to make mistakes this year, and I expect that you make mistakes, but I want them to be aggressive mistakes. I want them to be mistakes because you have passion for the game and you're trying to help the team win. I don't want them to be selfish mistakes. I don't want them to be mistakes because of, you know, apathy or laziness or anything like that. I want them to be aggressive. And I said, you know, if I make a mistake, I will own up to it. And there were a few times early on in the season where I was able to kind of reinforce that, where, you know, maybe I waved a kid home and he got thrown out or this, that, and the other thing. And as a coach, I'm picking out in my head, I'm like, oh, well, we just got thrown out at home because, you know, the guy that was at second base, he didn't quite read the ball in the gap the way that he should have.
Right.
And he took a false step back to second base. And then he took off to score, and he got thrown out by one step at the plate. Well, I mean, that could be obviously a coaching thing where you say, listen, you did this wrong, and this is why you got thrown out. But I didn't do that. What I ended up doing was I said, listen, that's on me. You know, I said, this is the situation. This is what I saw. I thought you could score. I sent you home when I probably shouldn't have. I said, but here's some things that we also need to work on because, you know, with the rain that we had this spring, we didn't have a lot of outside practice time. I said, and it's not your fault. We haven't gone over that specific thing base running-wise.
Yep.
You know, and so I kind of took the ownership of the mistake, but yet kind of understood, you know, they understood that it was something that they can improve upon as well. And so we learned together, right? And I think that went a long way with our kids because a lot of times in the past I would be like, well, you screwed that up. You know, this is what you got to do. You didn't do that, you know, and you didn't score because of this. And I wouldn't necessarily take the blame for it, I guess you could say, right?
Yeah.
But in this situation, I took the blame, but also I told them, hey, we're going to get the better together. And the next day we're going to work on that. And we did. And those things kind of hammered home right away with our kids. And we saw a big difference in them, the way that they came to practice, the way that they did certain things. It wasn't perfect, you know. I mean, they're still kids and they're still teenagers, and, you know, there were things that, you know, we had to address throughout the year, but it was a lot better. The attitude was better, and the way that they attacked each day was better, you know. And I think that's from building the relationship with them, taking ownership of our mistakes as coaches, letting them know that we're in this together. It's a team thing. And, you know, we want them to be leaders. Right.
Yep.
And that was the biggest thing. I mean, the last 3 years leading up to this year, we used to do a leadership group where I would pick, you know, a kid from the freshman, sophomore, junior, and senior class, or a couple of kids that I felt that were going to have good leadership qualities or that needed to be a leader. And we would go through, you know, the championship series books and stuff like that about being a leader and how to, you know, and I'm a big fan of reading on the game and what's going on. And it seemed like the kids were getting it, but they weren't applying it.
Right. Yep.
You know, like they could tell you what you wanted to hear,
sure, but
they couldn't put it in practice. And that was the biggest thing for me. I told them, you know, in that meeting at the beginning of the year, I said, you're to win a state championship or even a district championship, I said, you're going to have to hold each other accountable. You're going to have to understand that you're going to have to maybe get on your friend, and they may be upset with you for a while. You know, I said, but I want you to understand something. When we coach you guys up and we coach you hard, it's because we care about you. It's because we want you to get better, and we want you to have a better experience.
Yep.
And we want to help the team, And when you get on your teammate, your friend, who he might be your best friend, and you see that he's making a mistake or he's not doing things the right way, and you hold him accountable, if they're truly your friend, your friendship will last, through it. It'll be fine.
Sure. Yeah.
And it took about 3 or 4 weeks during the season. You could see that there were attempts to do these things as players, and I was happy just with the attempt. But then finally, a couple guys stepped up. One of them was Drew Shapaniak, who was our ace pitcher this year, our senior, going to Western. He was not a real vocal leader the last 3 years, and he took it upon himself to improve in that aspect of the game, and our team really gravitated towards him. And there was Colin Schakowsky. There was a couple different guys. Ian Stout didn't play a lot. He's a senior, but he was holding people accountable because they trusted him.
Yep.
They knew that he wanted the best for the team. So there were guys that stepped up and started doing it, and that's when I felt like, all right, we're making the next step.
And you can just see those pillars of trust and honesty come right through fruition. That is unbelievable stuff. And it's that's the makings of a championship team for sure. So the last question that I had on the topic of professional development and coaching for you especially is, we want to kind of target and bring in some other ideas for younger coaches, right? We would love to have guys coming into the profession that would have this kind of experience or wisdom. But obviously, as we've talked about, you and I both admitted that, we kind of coached how we played, and that may not be the best recipe for long-term success. In other words, what words of wisdom would you pass along to yourself looking back? Like, you're talking about being reflective in the summertime, but looking all the way back to when you started coaching and knowing that you were coming up against all this, what are some simple words of wisdom that you could give yourself as a young coach?
Early on, I didn't go to the clinics, and I relied basically on my experience as a player to drive my coaching philosophy and my style. And if I were to be able to go back in time and talk to myself, basically right after getting my head coaching job, I would be, my advice would be very simple. Be a sponge and search people out, to learn from. And pick the guys that you look up to as a coach and where you want to aspire to be as a coach, and search those guys out. Call them, email them.
I know, it's incredible.
I've had conversations. I've had conversations with coaches from different states, Texas and Ohio, where I've read an article, whether it's an inside pitch for the ABCA or some other collegiate magazine or something that has an article on high school coaches and what they do and how successful they've been. I reached out to them. I've emailed them and just kind of picked their brain a little bit. And most of them have been very, very generous and being able to respond and talk and say anytime that I have a question, I got their phone numbers, and I have picked their brain on certain things, But one of the big things that I would also say is, every coaching situation is a little bit different. You have to be very aware of your community and your school philosophy, and you have to be aware of what the kids are bringing to the table. Kids are a lot different these days in terms of what they get to experience than what we experienced when we were kids.
Yep.
But when it comes down to it, I don't think kids overall have changed. I just think that we have to, maybe change or manipulate our message so that they can hear it better. When we were kids, when a coach spoke, you listened.
Right.
Like that was it, and there was a little bit of fear there. And nowadays there doesn't seem to be that, but you almost need to really get them to understand that you care about them, before they'll actually open up and start listening to you and taking, what you have to say in stride. And I think at Woodhaven in the last 4 years, we've been able to do that. But the message may have changed each year, but the evolution of us as a coaching staff and how we relay that message has changed drastically. And I think it's been really good the way that it has worked out.
That is so important for coaches to understand that process is ongoing. It's every year, it's year to year, and you're never too old to learn, something new. So I cannot echo enough what wisdom you just brought to this, podcast. It was unbelievable. That is really good stuff. So working off of that, talking about going to the coaches clinic, one of the things that we do want to do is we want to make sure that people are aware that, we have an organization right here in the state, the MHSBCA, and you and I are fortunate enough to be a big part of that organization. But it's also a great time right now to talk a little bit about why coaches should get involved in our association. So from your perspective, talk a little bit about why the MHSBCA is such an important organization for coaches. You already talked a little bit about one of the big keys, and that is networking. One thing I've noticed about all baseball guys, and I'm talking from the high school level up and into the pros. There's been camps where I've worked with some pro coaches, and these guys want to share. They want to know their experiences. But talk a little bit about if you would, before we let you go, just about the importance of the MHSBCA and what it's meant to you as an organization, and how others should be, get involved and can get involved.
Well, I think it's just a resource for coaches across the board, but mainly for young coaches, because a lot of times the networking is great, especially when it starts to kind of take off. It's, you get one person, two people, and then they start networking with you, and then all of a sudden you have like a community of coaches. But early on too, it's just finding the resources to improve. I was at a coach's clinic early on in my career when I was assistant coach, and Tom House was there.
Yeah.
And Tom House was going over his pitching program and all this stuff, and I'm like, wow, but more importantly than just listening to what he had to say and how he implemented it with his kids, it was the resources that he used, the books that he kind of talked about.
Mm-hmm.
And so I just, in the beginning of my career, I searched out, people just to see, hey, what are you reading right now? What are some of the things, what are the resources that you use? Where do you find all these drills at? I have my drills based on my experience, but what about practice scheduling?
Yeah.
What do you do? How do you break it up, and how do you make it meaningful? Those are the types of things that I think this organization is going to be great for young coaches, because there's so many people there with so many different ideas and how to do things. And one thing that's successful for one person might not be for the other, but at least it gives you an opportunity to try it. And I think it's huge. The coaches that are on the executive board right now do an amazing job at providing these opportunities and showcasing our players and doing those types of things. But being a member it's huge. It's not just about getting your kids recognition, although that is a big part of it, because obviously to make all district, all region, you have to be a member of the organization to do that.
Yep.
So I think it's good for kids in that situation. But at the same time, I think with the younger coaches, it's just good to kind of meet. I love our district meetings, and I know it's uncomfortable for some people to be in those meetings, and you're trying to debate over kids and stuff like that. But I like it just by the simple fact that you get to talk with other coaches about the game of baseball.
Yep.
And that's what I think every coaching association should be about, is spreading the ideas of the game and providing a platform to learn.
Yep.
And that's really truly what I think the philosophy should be, and I think our organization is doing a great job with that. And I think with this podcast and the future podcasts that you plan to do, I think it's one step closer to getting that information out to the mainstream coaches in the state, and I think it's awesome. But when I first started coaching, I didn't even know that there was a coaches association until I went to the clinic and realized what it was all about.
Yeah.
So I think sometimes it's really good to just get out there and find out information from other coaches, and it's not always going to work, but at least you're given an opportunity to try.
Well, we're trying to get that message out there and trying to keep up with the technology, because you're right. The world's changing, and we got to change with it. And I think it's going to be, an evolutionary process on this end of things too. But I got to tell you right now, Corey, I don't know if you got a bat flip, because you knocked it out of the park, man. This was unreal. It really was. It was great. And if the rest of the shows are going to go like this, we are going to be on top of the world here, because this was informative. It was vulnerable. It talked a lot about exactly what goes into coaching, and I'm telling you, I couldn't be happier, man. So I appreciate you opening up like that, really.
Well, I appreciate the opportunity to spread my philosophy on coaching, and just being, here with you. Talking baseball is a great experience.
That's awesome, man. Well, listen, go do some reflection. If there's time, maybe hit the pool in the summer, But other than that, have a great day, man. I really look forward to getting this episode out there for everybody. And again, I can't thank you enough, because you did a fantastic job.
Yep, thank you.
Thank you. We'll see you. That was Corey Farner, head coach of Woodhaven High School. Again, cannot thank him enough for opening up philosophically on this debut episode of the MHSBCA podcast. I'm going to be reaching out to more state and national coaches in an effort to keep our guys in our state growing as coaches and create that network that we talked about for better communication. Until next time, follow the MHSBCA on our website at www.mhsbca.org or on our Twitter feed using the @MHSBCA1. That's @MHSBCA and the numeral 1. I'm Adam Woolley, and this episode of the MHSBCA Podcast is in the books.